Hi guys, this is yours truly Christine with Exhibit Africa Inc. I'm here once again to share some more fun and interesting facts about another beautiful country from the continent of Africa. So I hope you're ready. I hope you're comfortable. Let's go. Before we get started, let's get some background information about this beautiful country. All right, so here we go. Egypt is located in northeastern Africa. Egypt is bordered by the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, Libya to the west, Sudan to the south, and Israel and the Gaza Strip to the east. Okay, and that is as far as geology.com goes. So I guess we're not going to have any disputes or any arguments as to where Egypt is located. All right, so let's move on to our real fun facts because we have a long. We're going back into history as far as Egypt goes. So I'm not gonna waste much time. Let's get some of the interesting facts about Egypt. So here we go. Egypt is one of the driest places on earth. Considering it's mostly desert, this is one of the more unsurprising facts about Egypt. Egypt only experiences a scarce inch of rain every year, which makes it depend heavily on the Nile River for water. Moving on. Egypt wasn't always a desert. Okay? During the last ice age, the Egyptian desert and the rest of the greater Sahara Desert was a grass-grown plain dotted with trees and small lakes. Here, the prehistoric ancestors of the ancient Egyptians hunted and gathered food. Moving on, when the ice age ended, the changing climate caused temperatures to rise. In a few centuries, the region turned from a moist grassland into a scorching desert. Man and animals alike migrated to the Nile, which eventually birthed the ancient Egyptian civilization. All right, moving on. Egypt divides its desert into two categories. Here we go. The first part is the larger Libyan Desert, also known as the Western Desert, located to the west of the Nile and country of Egypt. Meanwhile, the Eastern Desert or Arabian Desert lies east of the Nile. Moving on, Egypt has two seasons. Although it seems unlikely, Egypt also experiences winter. Winters in Egypt bring cooler weather with storms from the Mediterranean. The winter lasts from November to April, while summer lasts from May to October. All right, moving on. The ancient Egyptians divided their land into the Black Earth and the Red Earth. Okay, the Black Earth referred to the dark-colored silt left behind by the Nile's annual floods, which made the soil ideal for agriculture and livestock. In contrast, the Red Earth, referred to as the reddish rock expanse of the desert, which was mostly dry and barely able to support life. The division struck such a great contrast that a man would stand with one foot on the Black Earth and with the other on the Red Earth. Now, that's one of the neat facts about Egypt. Okay, moving on. Ancient Egypt had two main regions. Ancient Egypt divided their civilization into two parts, Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt referred to the Nile Valley south of the delta, up to the first rapids of the Nile. Meanwhile, Lower Egypt referred to the Nile Delta where the river flowed into the Mediterranean Sea. Moving on, King Menes may have not actually existed. Okay, let's find out. Archaeologists and historians base this on the fact that he seems to exist only in legends and myths. Despite his reputation as the great ruler, no historical records or even all other evidence exists to his reign. Instead, experts believe that King Menes' legend comes from an existing historical figure. You know, as we move forward, you find out why I think his records may not have, he may have existed, but his records may have been erased, and you'll find out why as we move on. Okay, so moving on. Narmer hails as the founder of the first dynasty, the first pharaoh of Egypt. Unlike King Menes, plenty of historical records and evidence confirm Narmer's feat of uniting Upper and Lower Egypt into one kingdom. Okay, moving on. Egypt's pyramids are tombs. All right, so let's find out some more. One of the first things you would associate with Egypt are its pyramids. Originally, the ancient Egyptians built them as a final resting place for Egyptian royalty. Pyramids symbolize how light descends from the sun to the earth, the same way the pyramid descends from its peak to the ground. The ancient Egyptians also built all their pyramids along the west bank of the Nile, referencing the setting sun. This symbolizes the afterlife in ancient Egyptian mythology. Moving on, the Great Pyramids of ancient Egypt took centuries to build. Oh, okay. Let's find out how. When people think of pyramids, they think most likely pictures and perfectly triangular Great Pyramids of Giza. However, pyramids weren't always this refined. The first pyramids, built during the first dynasty, actually resembled the ziggurats of nearby Mesopotamia, which were stepped, terrace-like structures of stone. After a few centuries, the Egyptians refined their architecture to build the picturesque pyramids we know today. Slaves didn't build the pyramids. Okay, let's find out. Contrary to the biblical legend, slaves did not build the pyramids of Egypt. Instead, labor brigades drawn from peasantry built the pyramids, marshaled by the Egyptian government during the dry season. Well, I'm sure this is up for debate. Please tell me what you think. Okay, moving on. As they wouldn't work in the fields at the time, they worked on the pyramids instead. While building the pyramids, they received food and pay as well as a place in the afterlife. Okay, moving on. The Great Pyramid is actually incomplete. All right, let's find out why. Despite counting among the wonders of the world, over 100 ancient Egyptian pyramids have its details stripped away. In the case of the Great Pyramid, but what we see today is only a remnant of what it was, while weathering and looters stripping away its details. It's unfortunate that people are actually stealing from the pyramids, like stealing from the dead. Okay, moving on. Among these fine elements were a golden pyramid-shaped capstone set to the pyramid's peak. Polished limestone blocks once lined its sides before crumbling away during an earthquake in the 14th century. Okay, moving on. The original architect of the pyramids was a priest named Amhotep. The name almost certainly brings up the mummy franchise, but reality is Amhotep was a fairly common name in ancient Egypt. While the Amhotep who designed the pyramid was a priest as well as an intelligent and influential man, he didn't actually have magical powers. He was immortal. He wasn't immortal either. nor was he cast for treason in life. In the contrary, after his death, his achievements led to ancient Egyptians worshipping him as God in his own right. Okay, moving on. Egypt's pyramids aren't the biggest in the world. Okay, let's find out why. Egypt's pyramids may have been the most famous one, but they are definitely not the biggest in the world. The honor goes to the pyramids of the feathered serpent in Mexico, covering an area of over 200 square kilometers. In contrast, the Great Pyramid of Giza only covers an area of approximately 21 square kilometers. That said, the Great Pyramid is taller than the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent at 137 meters against 66 meters respectively. Okay, moving on. The afterlife was very important to ancient Egyptians. Okay, the Egyptians valued the afterlife so much that they spent most of their lives preparing for it. The rich and powerful built elaborate tombs which they believed they could reside in for the afterlife. The poor weren't as privileged, but they also made preparations of their own, usually making funeral offerings so they wouldn't arrive empty handed in their afterlife. Both rich and poor also made a point of living a good life as much as they could in order to get into the afterlife. Okay, moving on. The Egyptians valued mummification as an important part of preparing for the afterlife. Okay, the ancient Egyptians believed that the body needed to stay intact after death, as its resurrection, as it would get resurrected as soon as a person's soul entered the afterlife. This was why ancient Egyptians prohibited cremation and used it as the worst punishment for criminals. Okay, moving on. Mummification was a complex process. Okay, let's see why. The poor simply buried their dead in the desert, where the heat and the dry earth kept it from rotting away. Meanwhile, the rich and their organs preserved in special canopic jars. They left their hearts in their bodies, though they removed and threw away their brains. Okay, the bodies were then dried with natron salt before adding more preservations, followed by mummy wrappings made from linen and papyrus. They also inserted protective spells and charms between the wrapping to protect the person on their journey to their afterlife. Wow. Okay, it was complex actually. Moving on, the ancient Egyptians once buried people alive. Okay, let's find out how. Specifically, some of the earliest pharaohs had their servants buried with them, so they could continue to serve in the afterlife. Succeeding pharaohs instead had figurines called shbati, made in their servants' likeness, and had them buried with them to serve in the afterlife. Oh, thank God. Okay, moving on. The Egyptians believed that not everyone could enter. The Egyptians believed that not everyone could enter the afterlife. Much of their religions, the ancient Egyptians believed in the idea of final judgment after death, before they could enter the afterlife. The god Anubis weighed their hearts against the feather of truth. If the heart weighed more than the feather, Anubis would feed it to the crocodile monster Amit, with the person losing their soul forever. However, if the feather weighed more than the heart, then Anubis would lead the person's soul to Osiris in the afterlife. Interesting concept. Okay, moving on. The Egyptians believed in a simple form of immortality. Aside from the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians believed that as long as people remembered and spoke of a dead person, then they would never truly die. For this reason, another punishment reserved for the worst criminals in ancient Egypt was to have their names erased from the records and forbidden to speak of. In that way, they could truly die and never live again. This is the reason why I was thinking that maybe Menes was robbed. Maybe he was in their bad books. That's why they erased and never mentioned of him again. Maybe that's why there are no records about him. But that's up for debate. Tell me what you think. Okay, so there's no such thing as the curse of the mummy. Let's find out why. Instead, the ancient Egyptian priests would place prayers calling down misfortune on anyone who disturbed the dead's rest. While misfortune did befall many, most archaeologists haven't found themselves facing divine retribution for their life's work. Well, we'll see, because they just keep digging the dead and moving them. But that's what the Egyptians believed at the time. But I guess not not everyone. If you aren't part of that, I think it would be hard to believe that was their culture. Anyway, moving on. The so-called curse of the mummy results from popular fiction and the death of certain high-profile archaeologists, such as Lord Kavanaugh, who died from blood poisoning through an infected womb shortly after opening King Tut's tomb. Popular media hyped it as a curse, but his fellow archaeologist Howard Carter never suffered from such a curse, even with his involvement. Okay, again, that's up for debate, but I think the ancient Egyptians, that was their right for them to believe that, right? So anyways, moving on, the ancient Egyptians used certain minerals for makeup. Okay, so let's find out which minerals they used. One of these minerals was malachite, a copper core that produces green powder. The Egyptians used it as eye makeup along with coal, a black powder made from the lead core galena. To color their lips, the Egyptians used red ochre or clay rich in iron oxide. I wonder if we're making makeup like that these days. Anyways, moving on. The ancient Egyptians also made perfume. A popular perfume for men included cardamom, cinnamon, myrrh, and olive oil. The perfume had a scent not so disfamiliar from the modern Old Spice brand. Okay. Definitely one of the coolest facts about Egypt. Did Old Spice use similar ingredients? Who knows? The plant and animal products were also used for cosmetics and skincare in Egypt. The ancient Egyptians used henna made from the tree of the same name to color their nails. For lotion, they used a cream made from animal fat to keep their skin moist in the dry air of the desert, mixed with floral scents to keep themselves fresh. Oh, that was smart. Moving on, ancient Egyptians usually shaved off their body hair. Let's find out why. This includes the hair of the eyebrows as well as their eyelashes. Although it may seem strange, the ancient Egyptians practiced this to avoid getting lice. Wow, was lice very common then? I know how lice goes into your eyes, but okay. Moving on, ancient Egyptians made wigs from different materials. These materials also tended to reflect their customers' social status. Poor ancient Egyptians could usually only afford wigs made of wool or even papyrus. However, the rich could often use wigs woven from actual human hair. Okay, that sounds familiar. Moving on, beer was very important in ancient Egypt. Beer was actually the most popular and common alcoholic drink that the ancient Egypt for the ancient Egyptians. In fact, the minimum wage for laborers in ancient Egypt was 1 gallon of beer per day. Tombs of the rich and the powerful also included figurines of brewers, along with beer recipes provided for their convenience in the afterlife. That's interesting. Okay, the modern day calendar comes from the ancient Egyptian calendar. All right, let's find out how. The 365 solar based calendar we use today is fundamentally the same as that as what the ancient Egyptians used. The only difference is the name of the days and the months of the year. Originally, the Egyptians created the calendar to help predict the Nile's annual floods. Wow. People in Egypt used stone pillows, okay? Back then, the ancient Egyptians used headdresses made from wood or stone in their slumber. Wow, how comfortable were those? Moving on, the tradition of wedding rings goes back to ancient Egypt. Okay, to the ancient Egyptians, wedding rings and their circular shape symbolized an ending love between spouses. In ancient Egypt, circles represented the concept of eternity. Oh, good to know. Eventually, the tradition of wedding rings passed on to the Greeks and Romans, which lasts until today. All right. The ancient Egyptians also wore wedding rings on their left ring finger. The ancient Egyptians believed that the left ring finger had a vein that connects directly to the heart. As such, they believed that rings should be worn there in the hope of a lasting marriage. While this may not be scientifically accurate, many people still traditionally wear their wedding rings on their left ring fingers. Oh, that's a new one. Okay, moving on. Women held a respective place in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, women certainly enjoyed more rights and privileges compared to any other ancient civilization. Women could own and inherit property, open and run their own businesses, and even divorce their husbands without stigma. Wow. Okay. While few queens ever ruled Egypt in their own names, many other women rose to power and influence in ancient Egypt society, usually either as doctors or priestesses. Okay. Moving on, the ancient Egyptians had two alphabets. First and most famous is the hieroglyphics, an alphabet composed of over 100 pictograms, each one representing a concept. Pictograms were then put together to merge concepts into meaningful words and sentences. However, this script was used for only ceremonial and religious purposes. Moving on. One example of a hieroglyphic is a tadpole. The ancient Egyptians used it to denote large numbers, particularly 100,000. The ancient Egyptians chose the symbol for reference to reference how frogs lay thousands of eggs in a single batch. Smart. Ancient Egyptians' alphabet influenced several letter alphabets. Hieroglyphics influenced the development of the Phoenician alphabet, which the Greeks later used as a basis for their new alphabet after the Greek Dark Age. This in turn became the basis of the Cyrillic alphabet used in Eastern Europe and Russia from the medieval times to this day. The evolution of the hieratic script also later influenced the development of the Old Nubian alphabet used in Northeast Africa. Good to know. Ancient Egypt was a lost language until the 18th century. From the Hellenistic era onwards, people stopped using ancient Egyptian for Greek, Latin, and Arabic. the rise of Christianity and Islam almost influenced the fall of paganism and converted Egyptians from their ancient roots. Wow. This led to the academic knowledge of the old language getting deliberately lost or even destroyed as a legacy of their pagan past. It wasn't until the archaeologists discovered the Rosetta Stone in 1799 that they could begin learning about the ancient Egyptian language again. Wow. The Rosetta Stone was the key to understanding the ancient Egyptian alphabets. The Rosetta Stone is a stone slab dating back to the Hellenistic era, bearing inscriptions of a decree from Pharaoh Ptolemy v. Epiphanes. The decree featured 4 different alphabets with hieroglyphics, hieratic, demotic, and ancient Greek. This allowed archaeologists to use the known ancient Greek language as a means to translate the other alphabets and to build up experience in understanding ancient Egypt. From there, they could also begin translating other other covered texts from ancient Egypt. Pronouncing ancient Egypt names remains a lost knowledge. This is unfortunate because ancient Egypt alphabets lack vowels, forcing archaeologists to guess how words were actually pronounced. Unless a breakthrough is found, it's unlikely we'll ever know how ancient Egypt actually sounded like. Definitely one of the sad facts about Egypt. Okay, ancient Egypt worshipped more than 200 gods and goddesses. Each of these gods and goddesses embodied an aspect of the cosmos and their lives. The ancient Egyptians believed that their deities handled the balance and harmony of the universe, which was a major aspect of their religion. Ra was the most important of the ancient Egyptian gods. Also known as Amon-Ra or Amun-Ra, Ra is the god of the sun. Ancient Egyptians believed that Ra traveled the skies in a great ship and created the sun. Each day he would cross the sky, setting below the horizon to bring light to the entire life before returning to our world with the rising sun. Wow. Okay, moving on. Osiris, Isis, and Horus were the other important ancient Egyptian deities. According to the myth, Osiris ruled over Egypt with his wife Isis. His brother Seth envied him so much that he betrayed and murdered Osiris, chopping up his body afterward. However, Isis escaped and raised her and Osiris' son Horus in secret. After growing up, Horus avenged his father and defeated Seth before reclaiming his father's throne. This is where the symbolism of the pharaoh being the god Horus is in human form comes from. Isis later recovered the pieces of Osiris's body and revived him by putting him back together. As Horus already ruled Egypt, Osiris instead ruled over the afterlife. The eye of Horus was an important symbol in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians used it as a good luck charm and as a protection against the evil eye and the other malign influences. It comes from the legend of the Horus and Seth battle against each other, where Seth tore out Horus's eye. The eye fell to the earth, where men found it and used it to protect themselves. Wow. Seth was not actually an evil god. Despite his vicious feud with his brother's family, ancient Egyptians still worshipped Seth as a god. Seth was the god of the desert and thus the protector of Egypt against invaders, reflecting how the deserts that surrounded Egypt helped protect them from invasion. He was also the god of foreigners, guaranteeing them safe passage and hospitality. Again, referencing how traders had to pass through the desert to reach Egypt. Finally, he was also the protector of Ra's solar badge against the demons of the night, such as the serpent Apophis, and thus ensured the continuation of the cycle of light and day. Wow. Many Egyptian gods had animal aspect. The ancient Egyptians associated the gods with certain animals that symbolized the gods' aspects. Horus became associated with the falcon, a symbol of loyalty in ancient Egypt. Horus's wife, Hathor became associated with the cow, representing her maternal and nurturing nature. The war goddess Shikmet was fitly associated with the scorpion and the guide of the dead Anubis to the jackal. Wow, interesting. Ancient Egyptians considered cats as sacred animals. Since cats are natural predators who hunted and killed poisonous snakes, the ancient Egyptians saw them as protectors of the home and the family. Before, it was customary for each Egyptian household to own at least one cat. This also influenced religion, with the protector goddess Bastet becoming associated with cats. The death of a cat was cause for mourning among ancient Egyptians, with many cats getting mummified and buried so they could have a place in the afterlife. Additionally, deliberately harming and killing a cat warranted execution in ancient Egypt. Wow. The Egyptians worshipped Sobek for bountiful harvest. As the god of the Nile, ancient Egyptians associated Sobek with the crocodile. The ancient Egyptians prayed for him for good harvests and gentle floods. It was for this reason that the children received amulets carved in the shape of crocodiles, in the hope that Sobek would protect them from the crocodiles of the Nile. Interesting. One pharaoh tried to abandon the worship of many gods. Centuries ago, the pharaoh Akhenaten abandoned the worship of many gods in favor of one god Aten. He killed and banished priests, burned the temples of the gods, and moved the capital from Thebes to Amarna. After he died, the ancient Egyptians abandoned Amarna and restored the worship of the old gods. They also destroyed Akhenaten's monuments and removed his name from the most public documents and inscriptions. Wow. Moving on, the ancient Egyptians feared and hated hippos. Their large size and tendency to move in herds made them dangerous to meet while traveling on the Nile. Hippos would break and sink boats, leaving the passengers to fend for themselves in the water. That said, for all that they hated and feared hippos, the ancient Egyptians hunted them much like medieval European nobles hunted deers. Oh dear. Moving on, Pharaoh Pepi II had the longest reign out of any ancient Egyptian pharaohs. Since his young accession to the throne at age 6, Pepi II reigned peacefully over Egypt for 94 years. Ironically, it was also the same peace and prosperity that helped bring down his kingdom. Towards the end of his reign, local governors called nomarchs became richer and more powerful, allowing them to act freely and defy the pharaoh's authority. Pharaoh Pepi smeared his slaves in honey. Okay? Specifically, he had slaves smeared with honey before having them attend his presence. He allegedly did this so the sweet scent of the honey would attract flies away from him and towards the slaves. Interesting. Okay, moving on. Pharaoh didn't actually mean king. Instead, the title translated to great house. This comes from how ancient Egyptians saw the pharaohs as incarnations of the god Horus. The title thus references how a pharaoh was a god in human form. Moving on, the ancient Egyptians did not know about sugar. At the time, sugar's use in sweetening food had yet to reach Europe and Africa. In fact, it wouldn't reach either continent from Asia until the conquest of Alexander the Great. When traders from India followed in his footsteps and brought sugar with them, so instead the ancient Egyptians, along with other Mediterranean people, used honey to sweeten their food. Moving on, the ancient Egyptians had a sweet tooth. Just about every meal they had involved honey in varying amounts. This made honey production a big business in ancient Egypt and also caused dental issues with its residents. The latter was also made worse by small amounts of sand contaminating the ancient Egyptians' food. Eaten with their food, the grains of sand damaged their teeth over time. Okay. Ancient Egypt also made breath mints. One popular recipe included cashew nuts, cinnamon, frankenstein, honey, and pine seeds. I might come up with one myself based on this. Okay, moving on. Most pharaohs were very fat. Despite their official depictions in records and tomb paintings, among others, might claim pharaohs in general weren't very athletic. In reality, their luxurious lifestyle led to most pharaohs growing fat, not out if not outright obese, based on studies done on their mummified corpses. Wow. The oldest recorded death sentence in history comes from ancient Egypt. Recorded in Hamres papyrus, the sentence belongs to a young man from approximately 1500 BC. The young man had the choice of either hanging or suicide for the crime of practicing magic. Wow. Okay. The ancient Egyptians were the first people in the world to use sutures. The practice dates back to 4,000 years ago. Evidence for this comes in the form of sewing needles belonging to a doctor at the time, kept in a storage case made from hollowed out bone. Wow. The ancient Egyptians invented toothpaste. The ancient Egyptians created toothpaste with powdered hooves of oxen, burnt eggshells, and volcanic ash. Archaeologists also found toothpicks and toothbrushes in ancient Egyptian tombs, indicating that they took dental hygiene quite seriously. Well, after that consumption of too much honey in anything, it comes as no surprise. All right, moving on. The ancient Egyptians knew about antibiotics. However, they didn't fully understand the principles of antibiotics. Instead, the ancient Egyptians only knew that spreading certain molds from bread on wounds kept them from getting infected and let them heal faster. Thousands of years later, Sir Alexander Fleming discovered this mold and put it on use as the first antibiotic penicillin. So how did he discover it if it was already being used? Oh man, this play of words. Anyways, moving forward, the ancient Egyptians invented the first prosthetic. History's earliest record of the prosthetic was a wooden toe made as a replacement for a woman in Egypt. Found in her tomb, it dates back to around 1000 BC, being the first prosthetic of any kind in the world. Wow. Cleopatra wasn't very beautiful at all. Wow. Records of the time and depictions of Cleopatra on wall carvings and on coins actually show her as having average features and a large nose. Okay. It was actually her intelligence and charming personality that allowed her to earn the support of powerful men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. This also factored into Augusta's refusal to meet her personally, as he feared she might distract and mislead him if they did meet. Okay, so because she had a large nose and all that, that means she wasn't beautiful. Well, I guess there's been some misrepresentation in the images we see, and I guess that's what it is. Anyways, moving forward, foreign conquerors repeatedly conquered Egypt in the first millennium BC. The first to conquer Egypt were the Assyrians, who conquered Egypt in the 7th century BC. Egypt then became one of the Assyrian Empire's many vassals until the empire's fall later in the same century. After a brief period of independence, the Persian Empire conquered Egypt in the 6th century BC and ruled Egypt as a province until Alexander the Great conquered it. After his death, the Greek general Ptolemy crowned himself pharaoh, and his descendants ruled Egypt until the death of Cleopatra and the Roman conquest of Egypt in the 1st century BC. Wow. The Romans ruled Egypt for over 600 years. Wow. Under Roman rule, Egypt became one of the most important Roman provinces, thanks to the rich gold deposits and annual harvests. The first emperor of Rome, Augustus, even made Egypt his own personal province. That sounds familiar. Okay, moving on. The Egyptian revolution began on January 25th, 2011. The Egyptian Revolution began with its protest against the lack of free speech and democracy, as well as police brutality and government corruption. A series of crackdowns followed by the government tried to stop the protests, killing over 800 people and injuring over 1,000 more. That only stopped with President Mubarak's resignation on February 11th, 2011. A girl in Egypt was once named Facebook. Born Facebook Jamal Ibrahim, her father named her to commemorate Facebook's role in the 2011 Egyptian revolution that overthrew dictator Hussein Mubarak. Wow. More than more people use Facebook in Egypt than anywhere else in the world. Egypt ranks as the 21st amongst the countries of the world when it comes to Facebook use. Out of 20 million internet users in the country, there are about 5 million Facebook users in Egypt. Wow. The colors of Egypt flag each have their own meaning. The Egyptian flag has 3 colors: red, white, and black. The red symbolizes struggle against oppression, the white the hope for a bright tomorrow, and the black represents oppression that's fought against. Interesting. Okay, Egypt has a high literacy rate. It's almost marked with a sharp difference between genders. The literacy rate for men is 83%, while the women's is only 59.4%. Moving on, Egypt ranks 124th among the Earth countries in terms of life expectancy. Egyptian men have a life expectancy of 70 years, while Egyptian women have a life expectancy of 75 years. Egypt ranks number 66 among the Earth's countries in terms of fertility rate. Currently, Egypt's fertility rate is 3 children for every one Egyptian woman. This is greater than the US's, which is 2 children for every one American woman. However, it's far lowered compared to Nigerians women, who hold the top spot at 8 children for every one Nigerian woman. Okay, good to know. An actual Egyptian obelisk stands in New York City. It was named, it was the name of Cleopatra's Needle. Despite the name, it doesn't actually have a connection with the famous Cleopatra, last of the pharaohs of Egypt. In fact, by the time her reign, the needle had existed for over 1,000 years. There is also more than one Cleopatra's Needle, two more sharing the name in London and Paris. Each obelisk has also endured more pollution in the 100 years and more since their relocation than in thousands of years standing in the Egyptian desert. Well, not surprising. Okay, Napoleon didn't blow off the phoenix's nose. There is a popular theory that Napoleon used a cannon to blow away the phoenix's nose. According to the story, Napoleon did it out of frustration at his inability to find any secret passage leading into the phoenix and the treasure hidden inside. Instead, official records actually state that it was a Muslim man in the 14th century Egypt who destroyed the phoenix's nose. The man was then hanged for the crime of vandalism. Wow. Okay, there isn't any secret passages in the phoenix. The phoenix is a single solid sculpture carved from a large piece of limestone and for centuries could only see its head. Sand buried its body until 1905 when the archaeologists finally cleared it away. Moving on, three countries border Egypt today. To the west, Egypt's border runs along Libya's eastern border. To the south, Egypt's border runs along Sudan's northern border. And finally, to the east, Egypt's border runs along Israel's southern border. The only direction where Egypt doesn't share a border with any other country in the north, where Egypt faces the Mediterranean Sea. Egypt faces two seas. One of these is the Mediterranean Sea, as we've previously mentioned. The other is the Red Sea to the east of the country. Egypt may share a border with Israel, but it's actually quite short, with most of Egypt's east facing the open waters of the Red Sea. Egypt's tallest mountain is in the east. Gebel Kathrina stands in the Sinai Peninsula near the Israel border as the tallest mountain in Egypt. It raises approximately 2.78 kilometers high. The Nile is the longest river on the earth. The Nile is so long that ancient Egyptians never reached its source. Today, we know it's over 3,000 kilometers from the south of the Mediterranean Sea, in Rwanda and Burundi. One of the river's 3,000-kilometer length, nearly a third of over 900 kilometers, lies in Egypt, making up the last stretch of the river before emptying in the Mediterranean Sea. It's quite interesting that the source of the Nile, which is in Uganda, Lake Victoria, that's where the Nile starts, is not mentioned in here. But hey, I thought I should mention that. Anyways, moving on. Egypt used to have a land connection with Asia. This lasted from prehistoric times until 1896 when the Suez Canal finished construction, running almost 200 kilometers from north to south along with the western edge of the Sinai Peninsula. The canal connects the Mediterranean and the Red Seas together. This allows ships to pass through the canal from one sea to another and removes the need for ships to go around Africa when heading to Asia from Egypt and vice versa. Egypt has rich natural resources available. In ancient times, the most valuable minerals in Egypt included copper, tin, and gold. The ancient Egyptians used copper and tin to make bronze, which made Egypt a military power in the Bronze Age. The ancient Egyptians valued gold for its use in currency and for making jewelry and other items. Today, Egypt's known and valuable natural resources include oil, gas, as well as lead, magnesium, and phosphates, among others. Egypt is Muslim majority. Around 90% of the population practice Islam, following the Sunni sect of Islamic faith. Most of the remaining 10 follow the Coptic denomination of Christianity, though other denominations like Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants are also present in Egypt. Cairo isn't Egypt's capital city. It's also the biggest city not just in Africa and in the Middle East. It currently covers an area of over 17,000 kilometers and has a population of over 20 million people. Cairo isn't just Egypt's capital city, or I guess it has more than one. Okay, moving on. Cairo has several sister cities around the world. The first in New York, going back in 1982. Ottawa followed New York in becoming Cairo's sister city in 1989, followed by Dallas in 1996. I wonder what that means, what they mean by city, sister city. What does that mean? Please let me know in the comments below. Comment that. I would like to know that. Anyways, moving on. Alexandria is probably more famous than Cairo. Alexandria. Its fame comes from the city's history of being founded by Alexander the Great himself over 2,000 years ago. In fact, that's the origin of the city's name, Alexandria, city of Alexander. Wow. Okay, so let's see how many more fun facts we have here to go. Okay, let's move on to Egypt has the world's largest dam. This is the Aswani High Dam, built 10 years ago built over 10 years from 1960 to 1970. Designed and built with the Soviet help, the dam stands with over 100 meters high and nearly 3 kilometers long. The dam's construction ensured that flooding would no longer become a problem and also ensured a steady supply of water for drinking and farming. The Aswani Dam construction could have flooded many historical sites. One of those would be the Great Temple of Abu Simbel. To save the Great Temple and other sites, archaeologists had taken them apart stone by stone and moved to higher ground. There they rebuilt the temple as they once stood, preserving them from the rising waters of the Nile. This Aswani High Dam's construction also forced the relocation of many people. This included between 100,000 to 120,000 people across Egypt and Sudan. The Egyptian government built modern houses with electricity and plumbing for the relocation of people, as well as schools and hospitals. They also provided modern irrigation systems to help the relocated people start up farms and other projects. Good to know. The Aswani High Dam produces vast amounts of electricity. Their dam features 12 generators, including a total of 2.1 gigabytes of electrical power. This is already half of Egypt's total electric output and enough to supply most of Egypt's rural communities with electricity. Wow, that's good. The Aswani Dam cut off the Nile's previously annual deposits of silt, which forces farmers in Egypt to use synthetic fertilizer for their crops, as they could no longer count on Nile fertilizing the ground for them. Every year, an estimated 1 million tons of synthetic fertilizer gets used in Egyptian farms. Wow. Okay, so President Anwar Sadat made peace with Israel in 1979. This was in contrast to other Arab countries which stayed committed to destroying Israel and establishing a Palestine state in their place. Sadat received a Nobel Peace Prize for his actions, but the Arab League responded with the suspension of Egypt's membership to the Arab League. It also led to Sadat's assassination 2 years later in 1981. Okay. Egypt currently faces the problem of losing land, specifically land for agriculture, whether it's growing crops or providing pasture for livestock. The biggest cause of this is desertification, the slow but steady growth of the Sahara Desert as a result of climate change. Wow. Another reason for the increasing urbanization of Egypt's society. As more people leave the countryside for the cities grow, expanding into former farmland and depriving farmers of usable land. Egypt has a large and powerful military. The army alone numbers to 300,000 men, with more than 100,000 more serving between the Navy and the Air Force. Egypt produces much of their needed military equipment, but also buys a lot from other countries. This includes France, Germany, Russia, and the USA. The Egyptian military participates in several UN peacekeeping operations in Africa. The biggest are in Mali and Central African Republic as part of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali. Over 200 Egyptian troops serve as part of this mission out of the total force of 15,000 troops. Other countries that are involved includes Algeria, Canada, France, Germany, Jordan, Norway, Pakistan, Spain, USA, among others. The Egyptians have over 100 men as part of the United Nations. Wow. Okay, Egyptians have interesting superstitions for good luck. One of those is bury a weasel under your house's front step. Making the first step into another person's house with your right foot is another way to get good luck. Even accidentally spilling your coffee is a good omen in Egypt. Egyptians have also interesting superstitions about bad luck. Egyptians traditionally believe that a black crow perching on a person's roof brings bad luck to the house and everyone inside. Another bad omen is that if a person's left eye twitches, and also turning a slipper upside down is an especially bad omen. Apparently, it's an invitation for the devil to come over to your house. Wow, okay, moving on. In Egypt, stepping on your cat hair would make you bald. According to the belief, you must never step on cat hair on the floor. If you do, you will lose your hair and it will never grow back. Wow, okay. That was it as far as the fun fact goes. Now, this was by courtesy of facts.net. As always, I've been yours truly, Christine, with Exhibit Africa Inc. Thank you so much for staying tuned this long. If you've made it to this end of the fun facts, kudos to you. Until our next video, ciao for now.